I'm here today with Christine Chen, who is the founding and executive director of APIAVote. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So can you tell viewers and listeners a little bit more about what you do at APIAVote?
So Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote is a national organization where we work with local Asian American and Pacific Islander nonprofits to help build their capacity to increase voter registration, voter participation in elections every year, as well as preparing us for the 2020 census.
Okay, so what's the landscape look like in terms of voting rates and registration rates? What are the kind of barriers that you encounter?
So in the past, we were the lowest, we had one of the lowest voter registration rates, but a lot of it is, if you look at our history, it was only in 1952 that Chinese Americans were finally able to have immigration policy lifted, so that way they can actually immigrate and become citizens here in the United States. So if you look at this population, it's only more recently that people are becoming U.S. citizens and that they're actually trying to register, and we really saw that development really in the last decade, where now we're working with nonprofits, in 27 states, where they're actually doing regular voter registration efforts and talking about the issues. Part of it is also that almost 80% of our community are first-generation immigrants. So that means we actually need to demystify the voting process and democracy. And knowing that, voting rights laws are so different in each state, it's also about educating our top leadership about all those rules and regulations and making them also understand that as a 501c3 organization, nonprofit, that you're allowed to do this type of nonpartisan work.
So what are those conversations like when you're engaging in these communities, you're door knocking, and you're talking to people who might not have had a past history of being active voters, who might have immigrated from a country where there wasn't the same kind of access to the ballot or democracy that we have here? What kind of stories do you hear?
Well, first of all, a lot of people, when we first register them, they're actually thanking us because this is the first time anyone even approached them to actually ask them to register to vote. So that also tells us that there's not enough outreach and work and engagement with the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Also, I think in terms of whether or not, how do you engage them? Well, our community, they don't like to necessarily label themselves as progressives or conservatives or Democrats or Republicans. It's really about that relationship building that they have with a particular candidate, with a particular party. It's also about, are you addressing the issues that they care about? And not only during election season, but also year-round. When they're out in the community, are you asking them to engage in their town halls? Are you also providing language assistance for those who need that? So understanding the complexities, but also understanding that our community is growing, especially since the 2010 census.
Yeah, I read something like the Asian American population has grown by 70% or something like that in the last, since 2000.
Yeah, actually, in Nevada and Virginia, they even grown up to 167%,
That's
right?
wild.
So that's really changed the political landscape of those particular states. Even when I look at the last 2 or 3 presidential cycles for Nevada, Filipino voters, Asian American voters, along with Latino voters, are really making an impact in Nevada. And we've seen that in terms of local races, statewide races, and as well as the presidential. So even in 2016, we had, organizations conducting caucus training programs, as well as in Iowa. Now going to this election cycle, we're seeing presidential candidates actually reach out to the Asian American voters in Nevada to meet with them early on. That actually, I've never seen that in previous cycles.
Yeah, I was reading that only 29% of Asian Americans have been reached out to by a political party, by either political party, compared to something like 44% of white voters. It just seems like, to be just really politically craven about it, just cards left on the table.
That's correct. So for APIAVote, we focus on bringing in new registrants into the election cycle, but also we reach out to those that are typically not touched. And so we actually send them regular mailers in language. We conduct phone banking, and then for some areas where we have the capacity to actually also door knock. But what we found in 2018, even though we saw an increase of voter participation, we still got calls from voters saying, "Hey, I got your mailer. I don't even know who's on my ballot." Also, is there information about these candidates? So we know that parties and campaigns are actually not reaching out to them.
So we mentioned before the issues, right? And at the end of the day, that's what it all comes down to. I've read a lot about how the diversity of the Asian American community, including a lot of economic diversity, ends up disguising the extent to which discrete populations have very different priorities from other populations, right? So there's kind of a model minority mythology that says, Asian Americans are doing so well in all these respects, that kind of erases what's going on with certain groups. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Right. So I think that's why we need to dig deeper in terms of the issues and how they actually impact particular populations within what we call the greater Asian American Pacific Islander community, which really encompasses 49 different ethnic communities, right? But based on our polling that we've been doing since 2012, every 2 years, economics, healthcare, education, they actually continue to be at the top level, right?
Yeah.
These are still same issues that many other Americans also care about, right? What we've also seen is that typically, even though they come from different ethnic populations, and they may have been here different generations, when you actually poll them on issues, they actually all lean pretty progressive on a wide variety of issues. Everything from immigration to healthcare to the role of government. Actually, a lot of people don't realize that Asian American voters believe that and support a larger government and more services.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I, of course, tracking these poll numbers, am very aware of the fact that Bernie Sanders has been leading with Asian American voters. He did very well in 2016 with them as well. He won Hawaii, which is the most populous Asian American state. But I'm curious whether I know that when I'm talking to black voters and kind of reading the discourse with black voters, there is this sense that despite the fact that with us as well, polling shows that our priorities are healthcare, jobs, and the economy, just like general American voters, there's a way in which there's a real hunger for those issues to be framed in a certain way that shows that a candidate is interested specifically in reaching out and specifically kind of catering policy for us, with us in mind, rather than incidentally. And I wonder if that's something that you see as well, or something that's kind of unique to this, my own African American context.
No, I think as all other Americans, we all care about those particular issues, but they all impact us in different ways. So for instance, even though immigration isn't on the top of the polling data, but the thing is, a large percentage of our community are first-generation immigrants. So immigration policy is going to impact the way we view the economy in terms of access to education or to healthcare, right? And so also in terms of when you look at, are you third-generation Japanese American to first-generation Chinese American, or a Hmong refugee or a Vietnamese refugee, where some of them are also dealing with deportation issues right now, especially in the Southeast Asian community.
Yeah, I was surprised to read actually that 1 out of 6 undocumented immigrants in this country is Asian American. Why aren't we hearing more about that group?
I think a lot of it goes back to us getting the attention of the media in terms of also reframing what that actually looks like. And that's why people don't realize that when the coalition that's asking for comprehensive immigration reform is actually a very diverse group of organizations and communities, which include the Asian American population, who has a large undocumented.
So are there groups or ways, people who might be listening, who want to participate in either voter outreach or engaging in some of the other issues that are of concern with the various Asian American communities? I hesitate to call it a community because the diversity there, particular efforts that you would want to draw attention to?
Right. I think it goes back to helping pitching in within your own state in terms of finding out where is the local Asian American community organization that's doing this work. We don't have enough volunteers who have an interest in terms of engaging with this population. And there's so much work, especially leading up to the 2020 elections, because it's not only about the presidential primaries, but we also have the 2020 census coming up, which is just as equally as important. It has an impact of 10 years in ensuring that we get counted. So it really is about helping us get more volunteers to actually conducting voter registration drives, because that's where we find where we actually need more efforts. Once they're registered, they're more likely to actually turn out. But it goes back to that first step of asking them.
Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of the 2020 census?
Yes, so with the 2020 census, what people don't realize is that in comparison to 2010, there's a lot of cutbacks in terms of resources and gaps. So, for instance, just within the Asian American Pacific Islander community, 2010, they actually had paid advertising in 13 Asian languages. That's now been cut back by 5 to 5. Also, in terms of it's right now the census, you actually have to go ahead and they're promoting that you fill it out online. So that's also another barrier that especially that people are afraid of different scams and providing information through the internet. Also in terms of even the number of offices that the census is having, they reduced it down from 12 regional offices to 6 and 500 local offices to 250. What that means is that there's less outreach. There's less community messengers and paid staff that's actually going to be able to articulate with the necessary languages to this very diverse community about the importance of voting. About the importance of being counted in the census.
And what is the importance of being counted? And what is the political effect of being counted?
Well, there's a number of things. It's everything from whether or not your local jurisdiction, city, county, state will be provided resources for education, healthcare, a wide variety of things. We don't realize that how much census data is actually utilized in our everyday lives. The other thing is also about political representation. In terms of when we actually, after the 2020 census, we'll be going through the redistricting process, taking a look at like how lines will be drawn. Also, are there going to be particular congressional seats being displaced from certain states like California or New York and moved to other states? Just because if there's an undercount, that means they're going to move those congressional seats to other places.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really important to note. There's a way that we kind of can talk about it in the abstract, and I really want to nail down for people that being counted in and of itself is such a boon. I want to know a little bit more about you and how you came to do this kind of political work.
So I'm actually from Ohio. I'm a good old Midwesterner, Buckeye.
My mom's family's from Ohio.
Oh,
so
okay.
Whereabouts?
Oh, Columbus.
Okay, Cleveland.
So I grew up during a time period where the Asian American communities was quite small in the Midwest. And but I was always very involved. I actually at the Ohio State University, I was student body president. That's really was my first introduction to politics. Then I was actually introduced to the Organization of Chinese Americans and the Japanese American Citizens League, where at that time in the late 80s, early 90s, were one of the few Asian American civil rights organizations based in Washington, D.C. So really about coming here to D.C., learning about the political process, understanding about representation. At that time, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus was just created by Secretary Norman Mineta. And so there was a beginning of an infrastructure because our population was increasing and there was more interest in infrastructure building for our community in terms of representation. So APIAVote actually grew from that. As we saw more and more civil rights organizations representing the API community on different public policy issues, we recognize that we need to do more to engage our community to go out and vote. We only are more powerful if we can actually make sure that we vote on a regular basis, so that way elected officials and political parties listen to us on a regular basis.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, it's AAPI Heritage Month, History Month, and I wondered if there was anything good. We talk so much about concerns with voting and the uphill battles that we have to climb. But are there any events or initiatives that you think that listeners might be interested in, or just some good news to drop for us here on the pod?
Well, just overall, I think in the last 10 years, we've seen a growth of the API community, and we are the fastest growing community in the United States. And as a result, it has actually trickled in terms of what you see on media. So this is the year where we saw everything from Crazy Rich Asians to Fresh Off the Boat, but now we're also seeing more and more media projects being greenlighted. How people, the stories that they hear and the more diverse stories that are presented will also allow people to better understand the communities here and also their concerns. But then that also trickles into parties and campaigns also paying attention to this particular electorate as well.
And we have a historic number of Asian American candidates running in this election cycle. So there's something to be said for that as well.
Yeah, so, in 2018, we saw the largest number of API members of Congress be elected. We've also continued to see a number of APIs running locally. So that's really about creating the pipeline for this generation. We're also seeing that API young people are also taking interest in becoming members of staffs of whether it's for members of Congress or for elected officials to also running campaigns. So that's also exciting to see.
Yeah, well, our campaign included. I know I wanted to end on a good note, but I also forgot to ask you, our other guest that's coming on tomorrow is going to be talking to us a little bit about hate crimes against Sikh Americans and South Asian Americans in particular. And I saw when I was reviewing your bio that that's an area that you focus on as well. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit into kind of the rising incidences of hate crime that have begun to happen under the Trump administration, and what kind of activism or organizing you're doing to try to resolve it.
Right. So I think the last 2 years, a number of issues that the API community is passionate about they felt like they've been under attack on a wide variety of ways. So as a result, we've seen an increase in terms of engagement, whether it's more APIs, signing petitions or joining, the rallies, to even just having everyday conversations about how these issues actually are impacting their daily lives. I mean, that's part of the thing is like, I just want our our community to change the culture so that way politics is not a dirty word, but it's actually something that we should embrace, that we should be talking about because it does impact our lives.
Does it feel at times like it's a dirty word in the community?
I think right now, just because everything has been so divisive, and that's why I think our community shies away from the labels. That's why when it's about talking about the particular issues and connecting the dots to the communities, I think that's a better way of having the conversation without it being as being divisive.
Yeah, I was reading that a disproportionate number of Asian Americans don't actually identify as Republican or Democrat compared to other groups, and frankly, I find it refreshing. So I'm always here for an issue-centered, issue-first campaign and focus, and I look forward to seeing those issues being increasingly met by a wide range of candidates going forward. Thank you so much for joining me today, Christine, and this has been wonderful.
Great, thank you so much.